Hello and welcome back to the magical world of Yammie Noob, where we believe in creating a marketplace of ideas and providing content that looks at both sides of an argument, also known as our point-counterpoint series, aka I bamboozle you by not having an opinion one way or another. Just kidding, I have opinions on things, but I think it's more fun to explore all ideas. Before we dig too deep in today's video and hit the actual list, I want to take a second to talk about what engine displacement is, how it works, and why it's different on different bikes. It's important for those of you who are looking to buy your first bike to understand what all that rigamaroo actually means. That way you can make an educated purchasing decision and get a bike that actually fits your riding needs. And for those of you who already have a bike, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of why your bike performs the way it does. If you're new around here, go ahead and click that subscribe button and drop a comment to let us know why you're here. Why are you here? Seriously. If you like being the first to see all this screaming pube content and you don't want to miss out on a single video drop, do us both a favor and click that bell to turn your notifications on. It might not earn you a first like or a first comment spot, but then again, it might. And why risk it? Also, today's video is brought to you by Otmo. I'm going to let you guys know a little bit more about them later on. All right, Yamsters, let's decode displacement before we get into it. It's going to get a little dense, but stick with me here. The most common term you'll most likely see when talking about motorcycle engines and engine sizes is CC. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that term actually means, primarily because people assume that a higher CC equals a faster bike. And who doesn't want a faster bike? What CC actually means is cubic centimeters, and that's the measurement of the volume of the cylinders in the motorcycle's engine. That, my friends, is what we call engine displacement because it measures the amount of air being displaced in the engine. And as a hairy-backed redneck once told me, there is no replacement for displacement. And as an avid lover of torque myself, I gotta say, he was right. So what CCs are more closely related to is the actual size of the engine, not just power or speed. On bikes with higher CCs or a larger volume of cylinders, the engine is able to intake more air and fuel at once, so the engine is able to generate more power. Simple physics, right? Because the engine size or CCs are so closely related to power, it's easy to fall into that using it as a frame of reference for how fast a motorcycle will go. But there's so much more that goes into it. You could have an engine with a short stroke with wider cylinders. Since it's a three-dimensional object, engineers can play around with the height and width of the displacement they're given to work with. Short stroke engines provide sky-high RPMs usually and sacrifice low-down torque, and the other way around as well. And while CCs or engine displacement are an indicator of how powerful an engine is, the more accurate indicator of a bike's power is going to be the amount of horsepower and torque they offer. Why? Well, because horsepower and torque determine how quickly the bike will accelerate, which is important to know if you'll be riding in traffic, jumping off the line on a track day, or you just want to know your bike a little bit better. Now, there's a lot of variables that go into the speed of a bike, including gearing and power to weight ratios and that kind of thing, but keep in mind that power and speed are not the same thing, and that's where the all-important power to weight ratio comes in. Alright, now that you have a better understanding of the nuances between speed, power, CCs, displacement, all that stuff, this is all to say it's just a fancy way of saying all that. Let's dig into today's video. It's the 5 reasons why large displacement bikes are better than small displacement ones.
Oh, you stink!
Up first, we're going to spend some time with Captain Obvious. Number 1, they've just got more power. I feel like we've already covered this one, but as a recap, larger displacement equals bigger engine. Bigger engine equals bigger CCs. Bigger CCs equals more fuel and more fuel intake. Mic drop, Yammie out. If power is a combination of all the engine output components, then having a larger engine is clearly the way to go for anyone looking to rack up a lot of miles riding double, or just have access to quick acceleration with a loaded down bike. Whether your iron horse is loaded down with extra humans or chrome and saddlebags, a bigger displacement bike is going to balance out your riding habits with performance. You'll also notice that a bigger engine is more usable than a smaller one around town because you can quickly wick the throttle and get going off the line. Whereas a high revving sport bike just isn't so great off the line or in low revs, which is a pretty good segue into the next item on our list. Number 2, bikes with bigger displacement engines are more bespoke. Sounds fancy, huh? Well, that's because it is. Motorcycles that offer bigger displacement or more CCs are built that way for a reason. They're designed to perform a certain type of rider and meet certain needs. So you might say they're custom built for the masses while taking the needs of the individual into account. That's both fancy and complicated. Kudos to manufacturers who managed to nail that. It sounds like a marketing nightmare, but what do I know? I'm merely a vessel to share the good word of our Lord and Savior Rossi. It's not like I have experience or anything, and on top of that, everything I touch breaks. Bikes that are bespoke are akin to suits that are bespoke, which leads us to Number 3, they just have nicer components. And who doesn't want nicer components? It's like choosing a great value steak from the freezer section at your local dollar store over Kobe beef. And if you can afford not to, who does that? There's a little history on why bikes with bigger engines tend to have nicer components. It's not just because the big four and sport bike manufacturers are looking to keep costs low. As the engine and engine displacement gets bigger, they also get a lot heavier. So you end up needing a bigger bike to accommodate the extra weight without affecting the power output. And naturally, you end up with the sturdier frames, bigger tires, larger fuel tanks, etc. It ends up turning into a chain reaction because once you get the larger fuel tank, you end up with riders who are traveling longer distances, so comfort starts to become more of a focal point than it is on smaller bikes. Another thing to remember is that as these engines got larger, they got more complicated too. You start adding liquid cooling, several cylinders, electronic fuel control, and you're starting to create something that's just going to need more electronics to manage all of that. Now you can frame that as two ways. You can see it as it's more complicated, so it's prone to break more, or it's more reliable because technology has advanced. Now, no one likes it when their bike breaks down, and that's why Otmo has you covered for today, and they've supported this video. Otmo's a cost-sharing approach to aftermarket warranties where you pay month to month and only for the coverage you need. They're a startup out of Utah, and I'm super proud to support them because I think they're solving a genuine problem. Otmo can cover your big four bikes and your Harleys too. We've got a hell of a deal for you today. If you sign up before February 1st with code YAMMIEBIKE, you're gonna get 50% off of your yearly plan. Yup. You heard right. Yam scored you the deal of a lifetime, and it's not going to last long. You have until February 8th at midnight to cop this deal. Go to the link in my description, use the code YAMMIEBIKE, get 50% off your yearly plan to get covered. Okay, back into it. Bigger bikes are built to support more stuff, so you end up having plenty of room for all your doodads and comfort makers, things like rider aids, which usually aren't on smaller bikes because manufacturers try to keep things light. Which... I'm going to sneak in another point here. Because of the space for rider aids that smaller bikes don't offer, the bigger motorcycles get a leg up in the safety race and are actually a little bit safer than bikes without the aids. Now, I'm not saying that an idiot is going to be safer on a bigger motorcycle than they would on a smaller one. Not at all. What I'm saying is that the bike itself, in a controlled environment, offers more safety benefits than a smaller bike lacking rider aid components. Talk about a daily disclaimer. Moving on. The next chain on this reaction is better suspension. Nicer components lead to better shocks and better suspension systems, which is paramount when you're looking at a comfortable ride. Because again, the amount of weight you're carrying makes a difference on how supportive your suspension needs to be. Also, when you look at things like a race bike that has, top spec Öhlins, that's going to be something that's going to be only found on these bigger bikes. If you're carrying around passenger bags, etc., you're going to need a better suspension system than the 150-pound rider scooting around town on a Turbo Busa. Just kidding, it's probably a scooter. Your bike is also going to have more room and a better support system to house nicer suspension components than a motorcycle or a super sport. Facts of life. Speaking of facts of life, if you haven't seen it yet, go check out the video I made about why cruisers are better than sport bikes. A few of you disowned me for it, and we can talk about that later, but there are a lot of parallels between that video and this one. So if you're in the market and trying to decide, that particular set of point-counterpoints video will help you finish weighing the pros and cons. On that note, it's time for us to take a look at the last reason on today's list on why large displacement bikes are better than their smaller counterparts: torque. I love torque. All the torque. I'd bathe in it, drink it, inhale it, even become it if I could. Sadly, science has not progressed that far, so I, like you, will just have to settle for that old cliche of becoming one with my torque, or bike, rather. To revisit the mechanics of larger displacement engines, torque is what allows you to quickly accelerate. It's super handy when you're on the freeway and you need to pass an 18-wheeler quickly, or you find yourself in a sticky traffic situation and need to make a quick escape, like someone not paying attention at a red light and almost turning you into a kebab. Torque is the very essence of power. It's how hard the engine can twist its drive shaft, which sounds like a fragrance commercial. Essence. The power of torque. I'll work on that one. To visit the almighty Triumph, who will notice me one day, probably after my new fragrance takes off, we can look at the torquey Triumph Rocket 3, which makes an obscene amount of torque. Obscene. The Rocket somehow manages to produce 150 foot-pounds of torque at just 2,500 RPMs. Someone needs to call shade tree surgeon because that has to be illegal. I'm pretty sure my first car had less torque than that. Now, why is torque important? Because it brings us full circle to power. More torque means more power. It's science. Torque times RPMs equals power. Now that's a wrap for today's video. Thanks for stopping by. And as always, thanks for your undying devotion to all things Yammie Noob. I love you all, some more than others, but there's room in your old papa's heart for all of you. Be sure to hit up Otmo in the link below. This deal is not going to last long, and we scored you a killer deal. 50% off of a yearly plan. That's Wild. And of course, be sure to check out our beginner bike giveaway series. We just finished putting a full Leo Vinci system on our FZ07 and it sounds so mean. Hit the link in the description box below to learn more about that. We're getting ready to announce the winner of our Hentai Hornet as well, so make sure you stay tuned. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later. Fact. The longest kiss ever recorded lasted 58 hours, 35 minutes, and 58 seconds. That's disgusting. That takes the term level 7 clinger to a whole new level. I hope someone brought some chapstick for that. Goodbye.